Welcome, everyone. My name is Eunice Muthengi. I am the Director for Program and Strategic Research at the MasterCard Foundation. We're really happy that you're able to join us today to launch this important report on green technology and youth employment in Africa. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the MasterCard Foundation. Our vision is a world where everyone has the opportunity to learn and prosper. To realize this vision, in 2018, the foundation launched the Young Africa Works strategy, an ambitious strategy that seeks to enable 30 million young people to access dignified and fulfilling work across Africa by 2030. I work with the research and learning team at the foundation, where we support progress towards that goal by supporting research programs that aim to advance our contextual understanding and provide relevant knowledge and insights to inform our strategic and programmatic decision-making. We are committed to applying the best available evidence on effective approaches to creating work opportunities that are dignified and fulfilling for young people in Africa. Our research strategy outlines 4 principles aligned with the foundation's values, which are the lenses we take when supporting research. They are, first, that research is strategic and applied for impact. So it's designed and communicated for uptake, thought leadership, and impact on individuals, communities, and institutions. Second, that knowledge generation is rooted in co-creation and amplifies historically marginalized voices. Third, that the methods are rigorous, ethical, and respectful of culture and context, so they're not extractive. And fourth, our approach promotes reciprocity and restitution in the sense that we do not own the research and we seek to engage with communities to validate and take back knowledge. So for this particular project, we partnered with the Africa Policy Research Institute, a leader in policy relevant research on Africa's economic, social, and environmental future. APRI brought together a multidisciplinary team to synthesize literature and data on green technology and youth employment across the continent. We'd like to thank APRI for their rigorous work on this report, and we look forward to the ongoing dialogue. This report helps us to identify new areas to invest in green skills, capabilities, and technologies for youth. The findings are very aligned with our priorities around enabling climate-smart, resilient livelihoods for young people in the agriculture sector. So thank you again to APRI for this collaboration. We look forward to discussing the findings together today. And let's keep building the evidence base and partnerships that are needed to create opportunities for African youth in the green economy. Thank you very much.
Good morning and good afternoon to our participants and our panelists, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Tafaz Gomabaudi. I'm joining you today from Nairobi in Kenya, and I'll be facilitating this webinar today. Just by background, I'm with the International Water Management Institute, as well as being a research professor with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I'm looking forward to some very interesting talks today on this very exciting, relevant and timely report that has been produced. So to kick off the proceedings, we have a presentation on the report itself from Kate, who will be taking us through the report and showing us some highlights. And just by way of introduction, Kate has over 20 years of experience in research and advisory services. Her expertise is in planning for sustainability through new low-carbon sector development, business case, articulation, program and investment design, covering value chain insights, and general scoping research and analysis. Kate, thank you very much for taking the time, and I hand over to you.
Thanks to Fadzwa and Eunice for the introductions, and APRI and MasterCard for the opportunity to work on this. I'm going to share my screen. And maybe colleagues can tell me if you can see this okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So I have 15 minutes to take you through quite a dense report, and I'm going to do my best not to speed, but I might a bit, so forgive me. So just to give you a bit of background, this report is essentially to look at the current characteristics and focus of green technology policy and programs in Africa. And then we also looked at how much youth are included in this. Because it's a continental scoping report, which, as you can appreciate, is a very large remit, we also focused at times on a subset of countries. And these are Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, Uganda, and Rwanda. So you'll see some specific findings around those countries. And overall, at quite a high level, we've identified opportunities for better aligned and more impactful programs. And the structure of the report is shown in the image, which I won't talk about too much, but I'll take you through it sequentially. So the first, there we go. So the first thing to do is define green technology, which is a bit harder than it sounds. Technology is well understood as both equipment as well as ways of working, but green technology lacks a common definition. And one of the reviewers of the report made a very important point, which was that actually we should think about it in broad terms as technology, the response to the triple planetary crisis. So this is not just about climate tech, and often literature conflates green tech with climate tech, and particularly climate mitigation technology like renewable energy. In fact, it's much larger. It talks to technology that addresses biodiversity loss and pollution as well. And in general, green technologies seek to reduce the environmental impacts of consumption and production through more efficient resource use and new kinds of technology. And you can see the image shows, it's a diagram I designed, but it shows that the technologies often benefit not just one area, but more than one. An important point here is just to note that monitoring and assessment technologies are also really critical. And these give us a sense of data, so the data which can describe the problem we're trying to address, progress against it, and ways of addressing it. So there's strong links from green technology through to data and ICTs. Very briefly, I looked at a range of sources of material to try and do a decent scan of the continent, particularly at a policy level, starting with the African Union, and then drawing on specific sources. In terms of green technology programs, the focus was in the African Development Bank, as well as ICI, which is a German federal government initiative, which is a big player in Africa, and then some of the UN funds. In terms of youth employment policies, in addition to the AU, also looked at the FAO and the ILO, and then specific programs. So MasterCard's an example, the Food and Agricultural Organization, again, SMV, GIZ, and others. I also looked briefly at the existence of innovation hubs and incubators and accelerators. So to start with, it's important to note, in fact, that when you search the concepts or the terms green technology and Africa together, you only get 79 papers on Scopus. And these cover different disciplines, but there is a strong focus on energy as a sector. And again, in line with my comments about climate mitigation technology, it's what we see in a lot of literature. Agriculture also comes up quite strongly. South Africa is the geography most covered, but youth entrepreneurship and employment are quite absent from the research. And I think there were only a few articles that had youth as a word in the abstracts. So it's clear that that's not, these two areas are not researched or heavily researched together. The AU doesn't have a green technology policy per se, but it does clearly locate the environment in Goal 7 of the Agenda 2063. It does have a science, technology, and innovation strategy, which is going to need to be updated quite soon. It's until 2024. And there it looks more generally at technology in terms of developmental goals for society. And then the two strategies and action plans that are the most pertinent for the purpose of this research are the Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy, and it's a very detailed and substantive strategy. And then the sort of slightly briefer in response to COVID strategy, which is the Green Recovery Action Plan. Both do talk about young people's place. The CCRD, the Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy, also talks about indigenous knowledge, together with more sort of other forms of knowledge in terms of climate services and farming. And they both cover different sectors as well as implementation mechanisms. So agriculture comes out quite strongly in both, links to food and land in that regard, energy, transport, green industrialization, and then both talk about cities and urbanization a bit as well. The Climate Law Project database of the Grantham Institute is a really useful resource. And in the annexures of the report, I include all the different policies, strategies, frameworks, edicts, etc., for the subset of countries. But for this little policy review area, I was just looking at the policies, called policies produced by the subset of countries. And you can see, in terms of green technology, climate change, of course, a number have climate change policies. But disaster risk management is an area that's increasingly important. And this would be in response to the floods and droughts and other natural disasters we've seen affecting the continent already. And then energy is an area where most countries have policy that talks about green technology. And then forestry, also an emerging area in some countries. Also, all of the countries in the subset have national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And many have waste policies. And I think I might be correct in thinking Rwanda's recently done a circular economy policy as well. Then I looked at some of the funding programs on the continent. The African Development Bank's doing a lot, of course. And two of the more recent initiatives are the Alliance for Green Infrastructure, which is around infrastructure finance, that's climate resilient and climate smart. The African Adaptation Acceleration Program is the second one, and that actually has a youth sub-program. And they talk about mainstreaming adaptation jobs into multilateral development bank operations, but they also have 3 youth employment programs, including 2 in Nigeria, 1 in Sudan. I think the one very big one in Nigeria is around agriculture and an agro-processing initiative. ICI is the International Climate Initiative of the German federal government. It's already a big funder in Africa. It comes with a climate lens to green technology. And here, a lot of the focus of the projects that are funded, and you can see them in the graph in terms of the country subset, are on red, which is around forests and reducing forest degradation. But energy and finance and ecosystem-based adaptation also play a role. And ICI, and including in their across their project, have a fairly limited focus on employment, and this is an opportunity. And this is fairly similar for the 3 main funding arms of the UN for green finance. This would be the GEF, the Green Environmental Facility, the Green Climate Fund, and the Adaptation Fund. And the GEF is the longest standing and the biggest funder over the last 4 decades, whereas the Adaptation Fund and the Green Climate Fund, I think, were both established around 2010. The data, you can get all this data, which is wonderful online because they have project databases, so anyone can go through the data, look for specific sectors or specific countries. I try to summarize it. The way the data is presented and the kinds of categories are not the same across the 3 funds. So apologies that the graphs aren't all the same, but you can see for the GEF projects by country and by sector where the funding goes. And maybe just to note that biodiversity does get quite a lot of funding through the GEF, so biodiversity projects, and chemicals and waste, which is that orange part of the columns. And then climate change is the gray part. So you can see biodiversity, chemicals, waste, and climate change all get a lot of funding. And then there are also multifocal projects. And then an adaptation funding, I think there are about 40 projects in Africa funded by the Adaptation Fund. Because most countries only have 1 project, I didn't do it the same way, showing a country breakdown, but rather looked at sectors. So for adaptation purposes, agriculture, water, rural development, food security are clearly the most important areas. And that makes sense in terms of what we know around climate's impacts in the continent and on the continent. The Green Climate Fund has a number of projects across the continent. I think it's about 80. Many of these projects are cross-country projects and multi-sectoral. But here you can see Kenya has received the most Green Climate Fund funding. And most of the projects in Africa have been mitigation projects, although cross-cutting, i.e. both mitigation and adaptation, is also quite a common theme. For me, doing this analysis, the technology needs assessments of the UNFCCC were really interesting. And these are country-led technology assessment processes where number of criteria for the country are considered based on the nationally determined contributions. So countries' own articulation of the priorities for climate. And currently, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Ghana, and Senegal have these documents, these assessments in place. Ethiopia's is underway. And for the subset, the sectors are fairly common or shared. So agriculture, energy, water, again. In Kenya's case, there's a bit more focus on waste management. And then in the case of Uganda, a focus on forestry and land use change. And they're quite detailed. They go into the different kinds of technologies, both equipment, like, for example, you can see in the orange bar for Ghana, you've got rainwater collection, but ways of doing. So technology around how we farm or how we manage water systems. And here you see reference to community managed water systems. In Uganda, farmer managed natural regeneration of forests. In agriculture in Senegal, the examples I've given also have, ways of doing things. So conservation, agriculture, constitution, and fodder conservation reserves, agroforestry. So these are very useful, quite detailed assessments at a country level, and they can translate into technology plans. The GEF, the Global Environmental Facility, funds these. And I know that the Green Climate Fund's increasingly looking for alignment with these. So there is a level of alignment that's beginning. So as well as looking at green technology policies and programs, I also then went and looked at youth employment programs and policies and how those dealt with green technology. So, very briefly, just to note that the AU has had a number of policies and strategies and charters over time, including in 2019, the 1 million by 2021 initiative. And they tend to be cross-sectoral. So they don't necessarily deal with green tech or other tech, but they talk about, if you like, the urgency and priority of the issue of jobs for young people. The FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, does have a very robust youth plan, which links youth employment to the just transition and integrates entrepreneurship and technology as that relates to food and agriculture. So that's a plan that manages to integrate a number of those perspectives that talk to the remit of the study. But it's important to note, and this is the blue block on the right-hand side of my screen, that green jobs, of course, have been an area of research and practice probably for a couple of decades now. But the reality is that the evidence base is not really there. So the data doesn't exist across the board to assess the quality of the jobs, if they're better than other jobs, what the gender dimensions are, and if the programs have significantly improved employment outcomes. So these findings here I've drawn on a really excellent study by G. Moara and D. Glove on green jobs for young people in Africa. So it's worth reading that. So there's lots of work to be done on data, not just for green technology, but also in terms of green jobs. Looking at and drawing on an ILO Youth Country Brief review, it's clear that from a youth employment perspective, some of the countries in the subset do already identify green jobs, green industries, green technology as areas for opportunity. So you can see Ghana, Kenya, Senegal, and Uganda do. Many more, or quite a lot of emphasis remains on traditional sectors, but of course these also present opportunities for green tech. So agriculture, construction, infrastructure, all present opportunities for green technology adoption. And this just gives a highlight of a few of the programs that are considered in the report, and they're considered in a lot more detail. But what was interesting for me is that construction comes out quite clearly as a programmatic area for funders of youth employment in green technology. And it came out a little bit in the Scopus review of literature in Africa, but it doesn't come through in the green technology programs of ICI or the 3 UN funding facilities. So that's quite interesting. Perhaps it's an area where there seem to be relatively low barriers to entry for young people. And then my last slide before a final slide with some of the discussion and conclusions is looking at accelerators, incubators, innovation hubs. Again, just a few examples, because there are many, perhaps not sufficient, but certainly many. And you can see the role of donors and partners in a number of them. Some are funded by government, many of which would have, but not exclusively, but nonetheless very exciting, and they often link together ICT with green technology. So, for example, they can be in areas like efficient manufacturing, or looking at using satellite imagery or drones for agriculture improvement. And so there are also opportunities. Entrepreneurs found ways of connecting consumers with markets through online tech. So also an emerging and growing and exciting area. I've raced to my final slide, forgive me. But I just wanted to highlight some of the areas that are discussed towards the conclusion and the findings section of the report. And there are four I want to highlight for the purposes of this presentation and the discussion we're going to have as a panel. The first is that there's clearly an opportunity to better integrate youth employment within green technology conceptualization. And there are three things I'd like to highlight here. One is just overall. It's clear that within the green technology programs, youth employment is not one of the criteria or a focus area. So there certainly needs to be more work in thinking through that. The second is, and I haven't spoken about it much now, but science, technology, and innovation policies are critical, and ensuring that green technology and youth together are included in those programs and policies is very important. And the third is just indicating that, of course, yes, youth in climate tech, but also let's not forget technology to address pollution and waste, and technology to enhance and support and protect biodiversity. And I know from research I've done previously, there are lots of youth entrepreneurs doing work around waste, whether it's around organic composting, or calcium from eggshells, or byproducts, or construction materials from waste. There's plenty of opportunities, and you see amazing innovation. The second point I want to make is around how one thinks about sustainable employment, including for the youth. I would argue that what we would like to see, I believe many people say, is what one would call increasing transformation of African economies onto a path with structural transformations. In other words, new industries, new sectors growing in African countries, firms in those sectors, and creating sustainable jobs through growth, through economic growth. And those could be and should be in green technology, because we know this is the area of the future. So I believe there might be an opportunity to think about procurement linked to the green technology programs I identified and showed you, the UN programs, the 3 ones in ICI and many others, where there are common pieces of equipment or input for those. So, for example, we saw that agriculture, water, energy, food security are areas that often get funded. And surely there would be some common inputs like rainwater tanks, piping, maybe some silos for food storage or other kinds of food storage, perhaps some of the mounting structures for mini grids for solar. And there might well be local firms or regional firms that could be facilitated through the African Continental Free Trade Area to provide inputs into these large programs with a continental remit. And then the third is just to indicate that I've spoken about a sectoral view largely and a country view in the report, but there's an opportunity and an imperative to think about spatial economies. So in environmental sectors, people often talk about landscapes. But if we think about development spatially, it's not just one sector that needs addressing. It's how we think about, for example, what people call the WEFI nexus, which is water, energy, food, and environment in a space. And that's also a way of thinking about youth potential in that space. So who are the young people? What can they bring? And my final point would be about data and ICTs. And I've spoken about how critical it is to integrate and build data sets, and there's great potential there for young people using, ICTs, different kinds of ICTs that we need to understand baselines and improvements and enhance operations. But another area, and I haven't spoken about it right now in much detail, comes through in the report a bit more, but there's a role for indigenous knowledge as a form of technology. And indeed, indigenous knowledge methods are appropriate technology because they are local, they can be less costly, they can be more understood and better accepted, and can include local people more readily, including young people. So all of those could help us think through more explicitly and deliberately leveraging opportunities for youth employment in Africa through green technology. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kate. I think that was an excellent presentation from your side, and thank you for the coverage. I think what is interesting for me is how the definition of green technologies itself is linking to the triple planetary crisis across climate change, biodiversity, and pollution, but also that in the report itself, you speak of energy, being very explicit. You speak of agriculture being also very explicit, which is just highlighting the multiple linkages that green technologies have across different sectors, and the fact that they can play a catalytic role across the different sectors in terms of youth, employment creation, as well as youth entrepreneurship, which I think we should also focus on. Another interesting thing that comes out, especially from the policy review, and confirms what has been said in many instances, is we've got a lot of good and progressive policies on the continent, but sometimes they're just not explicit about certain things. In this particular instance, they are not explicit on green technologies and their role. They're implicit in mentioning them here and there, but there's no clear-cut message that says this is the position, which then funders would sort of need to align to. Secondly is the lack of explicit focus on youth in terms of the policy. So again, that is something that resonates in other sectors. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Zanzibar, and we were talking about youth in water and food systems, and that also came across quite clearly, that lack of explicit mention makes it difficult for youth to participate effectively in the various decision-making levels. The need for systematic approaches that balance trade-offs and synergies in terms of how then we implement green technologies, such as the WEFI Nexus, is something, again, that you highlighted in your last slide. And it's also an approach that has been gaining prominence globally for sustainable development, acceleration of progress towards several SDGs, as well as just, the thematic thinking of it in terms of restructuring partnerships, being more equitable and inclusive. So it's another key reflection that I'm getting out of this report. The lack of evidence on green jobs is concerning, to say the least. And I think it makes it also very difficult to convince policymakers to make certain decisions, because we don't have the hard numbers about how many jobs, the quality of the jobs, the sustainability of the jobs, and so forth. So I think that's an area where we must invest in further research to get that quantification done correctly, and so that we can have proper forecasts or estimates of what green technology investments would unlock in terms of employment across the various interlinked sectors and value chains. That becomes very important. And of course, what I like about the report itself overall is the fact that whilst the space that you were looking at is not an integrated space, but the report itself comes across very well integrated and very well balanced, managing to touch, from policy, institutional arrangements, funding, financing, which is a key area that needs to be unlocked, as well as being very solutions oriented. So the report does not just look at the status to problematize the issue, but by and large, it is looking at solutions. So it's very solutions oriented, and it is looking at how can we then move from here, which is the last slide that you basically presented, to say what do we need to do to move forward, and to move forward in a more coherent, more inclusive, more socially just, and more systematic way. So I quite liked that. And I hope that in the discussions that are going to follow, people will be able to pick up on those various dimensions of the report itself, and we can explore them a little bit further in a little bit more detail. But to move on now to the next part of today's webinar, we've got a panel discussion where we've got an exciting list of panelists who are going to delve further into this report that Kate has just presented. And joining us in our panel today, we've got Dr. Fade Adeniyi from the African Development Bank, who were mentioned as one of the big funders. So we've got the money in the room. Dr. Adeniyi is an expert in renewable energy and climate finance within the African Development Bank's Climate Change and Green Growth team. He has 10 years of experience in renewable energy project development, energy market research, and climate finance. And at the bank, he supports several climate finance programs to mobilize climate finance for climate action in Africa. So he's the right guy for this conversation. And also joining us, and just to mention that, he has a background in electrical engineering and renewable energy, and a PhD in developmental studies from the School of Oriental and African Studies in the UK. So quite exciting, and looking forward to the input. We also have Chimela Anusike, who is an entrepreneur with strong business acumen. She's a certified project manager and has experience with international certifications in solar systems design, mini grids, operation, development, and maintenance. For those who are in the know, solar is really a major topic of discussion right now in the continent because of the huge energy deficit in many parts of Africa and the potential of solar as a renewable energy option across different sectors. So I think it's quite exciting to have someone who's got expertise in that field joining us again in this panel, and from the entrepreneurship side, who can talk to us about the potential for youth to come in and create businesses and jobs for themselves and other young people. And so we've got those two panelists with us today. Our third panelist has so far not been able to join. We'll also rope in Kate, our keynote speaker, as an ad hoc panelist when it comes to the discussion and the question section, because we haven't allowed people to ask questions. So we'll bring you in at that point as well, to respond to questions altogether. So I'll kickstart now. I'm just waiting for my panelists to come online so I can see them. I can see one is there now. Okay, so this is a general question to both our panelists. As I've done, I've provided some of my own reflections on the report and the presentation that Kate has given us. So I would also like to give you an opportunity to provide some reflections at least 3 main key points that you think are takeaway points from this report. From your perspective, you're coming from different backgrounds. So based on your background and your perspective, what would you say are the 3 key takeaway points from this presentation? We'll kickstart with Dr. Adeniyi.
Thank you very much, Tafadzwa, and then thanks very much, Kate, for your presentation. And well, thanks to the entire team for inviting me to speak on this very important topic. Again, I'm Fade Adeniyi. I'm with the African Development Bank's Climate Change and Green Growth team. Let me start by congratulating the team on putting together this report, which very clearly articulates the trends in green tech policies and programs, as well as areas for improvement and the gaps. It was really interesting to read. But I'd like to focus on the gaps that have been highlighted, as that's what I do day to day at the bank. And critically, I'd like to map those gaps to some of the thinking at the bank, some of the things we're trying to do at the bank to address those gaps, and some of the things we're already doing to address those gaps. So the 3 gaps I'd like to raise points about are the limitation. So it was stated in the report that there is a limitation in the assessment of the impacts of green projects and green tech to create green jobs, especially for youth on the continent. And this is interesting for me, because this was also a gap we'd identified at the bank when we were doing, when we're implementing a project called the Private Sector Investment Initiative for African NDCs. We realized it was important for the continent to track the green jobs it creates from all of its green initiatives. We decided to do that by starting off in-house at the bank and looking at our own investments and seeing how our investments impact job creations, especially green job creation. So we put together a position paper, essentially convincing the bank to develop a framework for mainstreaming and tracking green jobs. And we've started a component of that, but then it's still largely unfinished. And then the idea of this green jobs framework is to, first of all, define green jobs in the African context, which we did in the position paper. Second is to develop a framework for mainstreaming, not just being able to track it by being able to define it, but mainstreaming it into the design of the project, so that when any project at the bank is being prepared or developed, the task managers and the investment officers have green job creations at the back of their minds when they're designing these projects, and not just thinking through it, but then providing them with the tools to mainstream green jobs into these projects. And as I mentioned, we've already started a component of it. We've developed a draft. We haven't published it yet. It's still it's not been approved. It's an adaptation jobs tracking tool, which, is the report has said, it's just a component of green jobs. So in fact, there's a sub set of climate jobs, which in itself is a subset of green jobs. But we started with the adaptation jobs framework, which is clearly defined what, at least we have a draft of what we refer to as adaptation jobs. The direct adaptation jobs, indirect adaptation jobs, and then a framework that allows you to look at a project that money is about to be put into, and be able to, from the details of that project, use this adaptation jobs main tracking tool to quantify the number of jobs expected from that project or investment. And of course, there's also M&E afterwards to make sure that those ambitions are achieved. The bank already has a jobs tracking tool. The idea is when we develop this green jobs tracking tool, we'll also incorporate it into the bank's job tracking tool, which then automatically counts jobs using this framework. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention regarding the impact of these projects and technologies on green jobs. The second is on indigenous technologies. I thought that was also a very interesting observation in the report, and it was very clearly spelled out the importance of having these indigenous solutions and indigenous technologies, especially green technologies on the continent. Again, at the bank, this is something we're also thinking about. As I mentioned at the start, I'm not sure I mentioned, within the bank's climate change team, I work within the AAAP Secretariat. The AAAP is the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, which aims to mobilize $25 billion towards adaptation action on the continent. So one of the key work streams under the AAAP is something we've called LLA, locally led adaptation. So ensuring that the adaptation, now I'm speaking of subcomponents of green tech now. So speaking of adaptation, so that the adaptation technologies that we encourage and invest in are locally led. They take into account the local context, take into account indigenous practices that essentially adapt to the impacts of climate change. And it's not just supporting them through, TA to help these investors and enterprises understand what the entry points are for locally led adaptation. But we know that there are businesses on the continent already pushing these innovations. And we know that because we, under the AAAP, we also have a pillar called the Youth Adapt initiative, where we provide support through training and mentorship and cash grants as well to these enterprises to essentially scale their adaptation innovations. I mean, we've had enterprises and youth-led, these are people under the age of 35, who've developed AI driven cameras to identify different types of pests, automatically identify different types of pests and diseases on farmlands and report to the farmer. And then the data is also used for data analytics to understand the nature of pest infestation or diseases on a farmland for future practices. We also have youth-led businesses that developed AI-driven drones that essentially go through urban areas to identify wastes around the urban areas and essentially strategically send people out to pick up those wastes or to gather that waste and recycle a lot of the waste. So these are some of the innovations that we've seen through the Youth Adapt program. We've had businesses even do working on drought-resistant crops and so on. So these are some of the innovations we've seen. Yes, a lot of the tech and the innovation is developed by these enterprises. Not all of the tech is currently, at least not all of the equipment is manufactured on the continent, which is something that the report outlines, and that's something that we're looking very carefully in. If you've been following the Youth Adapt program, you see that last week, or no, a couple of weeks ago, we launched the Youth Adapt, the third cycle of the Youth Adapt Challenge, calling for more solutions, and we've prioritized fourth industrial revolution technologies being developed by these youth-led enterprises so that we can provide that support to them. So okay, maybe I'll stop there on those two.
I'm seeing now that you are going into what was going to be my question for you. So I'm like, okay, let's press pause. Otherwise, I won't have a question for you. Yeah, okay. But hold those thoughts around what we need to be doing going forward, because I'm going to come back to you with a specific question on that. Okay. So I'll just move on now to our second panelist, Chimela, to also give us her reflections on the report and the presentation that Kate has just done.
Hello, good day, everyone. Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, beautiful. Good day, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. And well done, Apri. Thank you for having me. And well done, I must congratulate the team on the report. So I must say that it is particularly, I went through the report and all of its details, and it is what we need at this time. And is particularly pointing out to most of the challenges you're facing and on the relevance of green technology. So a few of the key takeaways for me from the report is relevance of green technology. I must appreciate the fact that it places so much relevance on green technology. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Chemela Nosike. I'm the founder of Solaris Green Tech Hub. I'm a young person running a startup in Nigeria. We are well aware of the energy crisis, energy problems in the continent and in the country as well. And there are quite a number of energy solutions in the market trying to solve this problem. But then again, those at the bottom of the pyramid, those who live, who typically live below $1 daily, are excluded from the solutions in the market because of the cost, of adoption. So what we are trying to do is that we are, reducing the cost of adoption. We are rendering energy as a service to those in rural and peri-urban communities. So back to the report. So one of the key takeaways for me is that the relevance of green technology. So the report currently highlights the relevance of green technology, in addressing the intertwined challenges of climate change, culture, and clean energy, which is the sector that I am playing a key role in. I also love the fact that the reports talked about youth empowerment. So last year I was in COP27, and there was a lot of conversation around youth employment, youth empowerment, skill building. Of course, the truth is that the young persons are the ones who are feeling and are going to feel the greater impact of climate change. And we need to do a lot of things around equipping them, to either adapt to provide solutions, facing us, and all of that. So I love the fact that the report emphasizes the importance of engaging youth, in green technology activities, and then also giving the youth unemployment rate in Africa. I love the fact that it's involving young persons in the development and adoption of green technologies, and also addressing environmental challenges. I also love the fact that it pointed out the need for policy consistency, the sectorial focus, the integration of so many sectors like energy, agriculture, water, environment, into finding more effective and sustainable solution. And then one of the things I also took away from the report is also the role of ICT, leveraging ICT for data analysis, marketing, international, activities that can also be a promising approach to creating youth employment opportunity. I also, love the fact that it's also mentioned indigenous knowledge, leveraging indigenous, knowledge. Also, one of the things we mentioned at COP last year was on energy transition, and the truth is that if we're going to have a smooth, clean energy transition, we need to carry, the indigenous people along. So for my company, we've never deployed clean energy to some very rural community. And then when you approach, most of the indigenous people, they have a lot of misconception and all that. So we have to put them through, take them to sensitization programs, take them to educational programs, tell them the benefits of, clean energy, why they should embrace clean energy and all that. And I think it's one of the key things that the report also mentioned, indigenous knowledge. And then finally, on local manufacturing. Nigeria, for instance, we import over, more than 50% of what we consume. And it's very important that we start placing, so much emphasis and having conversations around, manufacturing. And the report suggests that local manufacturing of, most of this green technology in goods and services can also contribute to youth employment. And this highlights the potential for African firms and the importance of aligning major green technology programs with local capability. So these are some of the key things that I took away from the report. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chimela. So I'm going to come back now with some specific questions. And some of the issues you've already highlighted on them or in your reflections. But I'll kickstart, I'll mix things up a bit. I'll kickstart with Kate and bring it back to the fore. This is a question that I have for you, Kate. There's often the challenge of policy scale mismatch between global, regional, national, and local levels. So we've got all these big policies like at the continental level, and sometimes they get domesticated at the national level, but they might not truly reflect the situation or the context on the ground. Now, how can we ensure that we have a green technology program that is still a continental program, but that resonates strongly with the local context?
So that's the $1 million question, right? I mean, I liked what Fade was saying around locally led adaptation. I do think that just, having an initial look at some of the UN funding programs, they do have nationally accredited entities that are the national partners who are the go-betweens and who actually drive a lot of the conceptualization and project design according to high-level criteria. And so I think that linking those national, maybe firstly having more of those, because I understand from the Africa chapter of the IPCC's latest assessment report that there are not actually many African accredited implementing entities that can meet the criteria of the GCF Adaptation Fund and the GEF. I'm sorry to be technical, but I think actually some of the answers sometimes are in the technical detail. So that would be the first thing, is just making sure that we can have more access to these funding streams. And then it's building on also recognizing perhaps that because this funding has to be governed by strict rules, that we have to also find pots of funding for more local innovation, more project-led work, more entrepreneurship-led work in spaces. And I'm not a real expert on this, but I understand that those funds I was referring to are looking at small grants programs. Some of them have them in place already, more small grants programs, because I think it's a global cry from the developing world that the structures that are meant to help the world address climate and other crises are not actually accessible. The scale is not sufficient and the design doesn't talk to local context. So I think this is well articulated in many fora. So I think that firstly, making sure that we have greater access to the funding that does exist, that those national entities are including youth entrepreneurship and employment and deliberate thinking through and methods for that. But then also just recognizing perhaps that we need more flexible pots of money at a local level, maybe smaller amounts to work with entrepreneurs, to work with community-based organizations, to work with local industry associations who's sitting in spaces where they understand the issues and how to work is hugely important. And more progress in that regard. I think it's increasingly recognized. I'm not sure what the status is in terms of funding and institutional support yet. Others would be better placed, but that would be, for me, 2 ways to start thinking about it.
Thanks very much. I think you're quite on point. And yeah, you're also quite well informed in terms of the cries from the global south, in terms of how, climate finance and funding from the multilateral institutions is not really accessible. Some of the criteria is not easily achievable for, developing countries in the south. And also the need for more direct access finance and small grant facilities that really target local actors, so that you go past the bureaucratic system and go where the money and where the resources are needed. And that resonates very well with what Adeni was saying earlier on in his reflections. So I'll move back to Adeni now as the guy sitting, where the pace is at the AF. Now, how do you think, and this is always a question that comes around, so what sort of policies and programs do we need to put in place to promote youth inclusion and participation in green technology? You gave a whole array of what the bank is doing, and I could bring out a whole busload of young people who don't know about most of the things that you were saying. So how do we build awareness amongst young people? What is missing and what can we do better?
Thank you very much, Tafata. So on this question, sorry, I'm tempted to make a point about something Sewa said. Kate said about the access to multilaterals, which Tafata has also mentioned. I know it's a very sometimes a very huge challenge mobilizing resources from these multilateral funds, and a lot of times, like Tafaso has said, it's a lot of times it's down to these very stringent requirements, especially on historical data, to prove certain rationales. And what the bank is currently doing, and sorry to bring it back to what the bank is doing, but then what the bank is currently doing is we have this program under the AAAP called I think it's a TAP, Technical Assistance Program for DAE, so direct access entities. This is to help build the capacity of institutions on the continent to be accredited, but then not just to be accredited, but then to be able to build bankable pipelines of green projects that can then mobilize resources at scale. Something else the bank is also doing is that we've set up something called the Climate Action Window, and it's in the process of being operationalized this year. And then there'll be a call for investments sometime at the end of this year. So this is, I think, just under $500 million to mobilize resources towards climate change mitigation and adaptation projects. And the key thing for this is that there will be no requirements or direct access entity requirements. Anyone can apply for these resources. Of course, there has to be a strong climate rationale and other requirements that you need to fulfill. But then it recognizes the capacity challenges with a sub window called the technical assistance window. It also recognizes the historical data limitations in the way its operations are designed, so that we can reduce some of those challenges that the continent faces with these legacy climate multilateral funds. But then to go to your question, sorry, Tafata, you'd asked me to speak about opportunities to improve policy and programmatic focus for green tech. I'll speak about it from the point of youth-led green tech solutions. So I'll give one example each of 2 points. First, regarding the policy improvement, and second, regarding programmatic support and what we should be doing based on our experience at the bank. First, on policies. So during the implementation of the Youth Adapt program, where we support enterprises with mentorship, training, capacity development, and actual cash grants of up to $100,000 each. One of the policy challenges we noticed was the policy barriers to expand businesses across borders. So we had this one of our innovative, youth-led enterprises trying to expand into 2 new countries on the continent, and it took between, I think, 3 months to half a year just to fill out the paperwork. Just the paperwork, not mobilizing. That time is just too long. So we need countries to work together to ease that sort of expansion for these innovative enterprises, especially those with the potential to scale these sort of green innovations on the continent. So that was the first one. Reducing the barriers for entering new markets within the continent, I think is an obvious thing we need to do moving forward. The second is providing support to innovative enterprises at different stages, green tech enterprises at different stages of their business growth. So what we launched 3 years ago and are still implementing is the Youth Adapt Accelerator. So we take these innovative enterprises through this 12-month accelerator program. But what we realized that, like you said, we've supported 33 so far. But then there are thousands of these enterprises, right? And what we realize, apart from the sometimes resource constraints, we'll realize that a lot of these businesses are at different stages of their business growth. Some of them are too early for the accelerator, but then they still have really innovative solutions. Some of them have passed are too mature for the accelerator and they're investment ready. What they need is very specific sort of TA and hand-holding to reach financial close with their financiers. So that's something we know. So going forward, what we've done for the next year, what we're proposing is instead of just having the accelerator, we are going to have an incubator as well to target some of those really highly innovative scalable solutions that don't quite have a minimum viable product yet, but we can see their potential, or they have a minimum viable product, but then they don't have a long enough track record. For the accelerator, it has to be 2 years. But there are people with minimum viable, the enterprises with minimum viable products that have a track record of less than 2 years. So we need to cater for those groups as well through the incubator. And then is a program we're calling the Youth Adapt Launchpad. And then the post-accelerator support for enterprises that are already investment ready. They just need very specific support, such as legal services or financial modeling or some sort of due diligence activity requested by the financier. We will provide the TA through what we're calling an innovation hub to these investment-ready enterprises so that they can scale their solutions. But not just enterprises are investment-ready across the continent, but then the graduates who have come out of the Youth Adapt Accelerator already provide a ready pipeline for this investment hub. Transaction hub, Youth Adapt Transaction Hub. So just to summarize, there are two things I would recommend going forward based on our experience at the bank. First is reduce the barriers to cross-country expansion on the continent, and second is recognizing that these innovative enterprises are at different stages. This green tech innovative green tech enterprises are at different stages of their growth, and we need to provide tailored support to these groups depending on their needs. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Tabata.
Thanks very much. We'll come back to your last point in the last sum up session, where I'm going to ask you to give your main recommendations for how we take the process forward. So you have an opportunity to perhaps elaborate just a little bit on that. Moving on now to Chimela, you are the entrepreneur here on this panel. So what are the opportunities that you see for green technologies, looking at the value chain, especially for creating youth employment or for creating youth entrepreneurs like yourself?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Oh, the question was, what are the opportunities in terms of green technologies that you see for creating youth employment as well as entrepreneurs such as yourself?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. And there are quite a number of opportunities for young persons who either want to pursue the path of entrepreneurship or improve great employment with green technologies. So I would take myself for instance. I run a startup, a clean tech startup, where we are leveraging clean technologies and renewable technologies such as the solar. Uh, Providing access to electricity for those in rural and peri-urban communities. And I could say for sure that it has been a great way of creating, it has been a good way of creating employment, not just for myself as the here persons who have employed over the years work with us. So there are a lot of potentials, for great technologies in creating, in great entrepreneurship opportunities and creating employment for young. And then also part of what we do is that we take these young persons on trainings. So we take them through trainings, solar installation training, and design, construction, and all of that. And over to train a number of persons in various skill areas. It's so what we do, we also help workers on ideas, prototype, and all that, and to be able to help
Chimela,
get access to funding, and also lancers, installers, editors, and all that. So this will create an idea of how of the
okay, I think we've lost Chimela. Her network seems to be poor, but I think we'd pretty much gotten the message in terms of what she was putting forward as the opportunities along the value chain. Now we've got some bit of time before we bring this whole webinar to an end to take some questions from our online participants. So I'm opening the floor for questions for our speakers and panelists, if there are any questions. And maybe perhaps the tech team can assist with pushing forward the questions through. Because on my side, I cannot see any hands being raised. Okay, the questions are starting to come through. First question is, are continental actors collaborating with other continental actors when it comes to green technology and youth employment, or are they working in silos? Any one of you can take the question if you feel comfortable.
Please, can you come again with the question, Tata?
The question is asking if continental actors are collaborating when it comes to green technology and youth employment, or do we have the situation where people are working in silos?
So maybe I can take this at least from the point of view of the program that I mentioned. Let me first of all state that there's always room for improvement to make sure that all of the actors that have similar expected outcomes need to align in terms of the delivery of their programs, just to have better scale and higher impact. So I'll give an example of the Youth Adapt program. So we've partnered with partnerships. We've found that partnerships are the key for the success of the program. Without partnerships, there will be no money for the program, or there wouldn't be enough money for the program. Without partnerships, the visibility is reduced, and you don't get enough. Again, back to the resource mobilization, you don't get enough funding for the program. So on this program, we partnered with the Global Center on Adaptation, the IFC, and a few other multilaterals on the continent. But critically, we've also partnered with several climate innovation centers across the continent. And these climate innovation centers, they know where these innovative enterprises or youth-led solutions are on the continent. So we work with them to identify these innovators in their respective countries and essentially provide support to them. So I agree with the underlying sentiment of that question that there's a need for more partnerships to be established to support programs like the Youth Adapt that achieve this outcome of proliferation of green technology and youth employment. So yeah, there's definitely need for more partnerships, because at the end of the day, besides all of the other benefits, it helps to raise more funding for these enterprises, for these solutions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Adeni. A follow-up question for you before you run away. There's a follow-up question which is asking, how are youth organizations identified for Continental initiatives?
So yes, we identify them, as I mentioned earlier, through these climate innovation hubs. We also have a jobs team at the bank. Actually, the team is called Jobs for Youth in Africa. So what they primarily do is support initiatives and projects that essentially provide support to enterprises, provide support to job creation, provide support to enterprise support organizations, including climate innovation centers. So the Jobs for Youth in Africa team at the bank supports the ecosystem on the continent to essentially promote youth-led entrepreneurship and job creation. And that ecosystem that they support, they use that ecosystem to identify these innovative solutions, but also to mention with regard to partnerships. So it's not just partnerships on the side of the financiers or the donors. It's also partnerships. We also have partnerships amongst these innovative enterprises as well. I know the winners or the beneficiaries of the Youth Adapt program have set up or in the process of setting up a network. I forget the name of the network now, but the idea is to promote peer learning, peer mentorship, and guide other, get the more experienced enterprises to guide the newer ones on pathways to scaling their solutions. Well, yes, we use the ecosystem that we've identified, which is the enterprise support organizations, innovation hubs across the continent, and because we're a multilateral in Africa, we also work directly with the governments as well to identify these solutions. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much, Adeni. And then I'll come back to Chimela. Two things. We lost you before you finished answering your question. So firstly, I'll give you a minute to just maybe say some finishing statements that you didn't make. And then there's a question also for you, which you can then follow up. And I think it's tied to what you were saying before we lost you. So have you tried accessing an initiative or funding from a continental actor or a continental body? And what was your experience of that? So over to you, Chimela.
Sorry, could you repeat the last follow-up question?
Okay, the follow-up question is, have you tried accessing an initiative or funding from a continental actor or body, and what was your experience?
Okay, thank you so much. So just to wrap up what I was saying before, the network threw me out. I'm actually in a rural community. I came in for a solar project, so the network is quite shaky. According to the USFDF report of 2019, energy poverty, so I'm speaking from the energy angle here, energy poverty in Nigeria creates a market set of about 1.2 trillion USD, and that is a very huge market and opportunity, most especially for renewable energy startups, that's clean tech, startups. And there are also lots of opportunities, for young persons in the green technology space, ranging from, leveraging renewable energy, starting up, creating startups, coming up with ideas around renewable energy, around energy efficiency, around, environmental consulting. It could be, around EV, electric vehicles, and all of that. So those are, quite the opportunities, large number of those opportunities. And then there are also difficulties and all of that, but I'll leave that for now. Now, to the follow-up question, yes, of course, as an entrepreneur, we've been able to get access to some of those continental and even international funding. I was able to get access to funding. Started last year, I won award of the Young Talent Award and get access to funding and all of that. Challenges are countered. Challenges there are there. When it comes to try to share. So please confirm you can hear me. I'm not so sure I can hear or see anyone.
I can still hear you. You can go ahead. I can hear you.
Please confirm you can still hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so okay. Thank you so much. So I was saying I've been able, as a startup, been able to access some, continental regional funding, some international funding. We're able to access the Rhetorica, Young of the Year. We're able to access the team grant funding and some other, funding programs as well. Now, one of the challenges, most entrepreneurs face, first of all, where to get access to this funding opportunities. And one of the ways to work around it, which is what I do, is belonging a lot of most of those networks. So I had mentioned some clean tech acceleration programs. Also being a part of this clean tech acceleration programs, which we are a part of quite a number of them. We are part of the Clean Tech Hub Nigeria Acceleration Program. We're part of the NCC Nigerian Climate Innovation Project Acceleration Program. And then being a part of this project gives you access to first-hand information when these opportunities are being shared. So that is one of the problems, and that is one of the mitigating ways of going around it. Then that we also counter is usually requirement on the side of the funders, on the side of us. And I also, over Adeni, you mentioned, some of the requirements for the project, and then, their plans of getting on board incubation programs and also acceleration programs. So most of the time, usually you want to assess funding, you want to get access to this project, and then meet up to the requirements. So these certain agreements that you're starting the MBE stage, and then you don't have all the requirements, you don't have all the regulations, the registrations, and all that. But you still need access. You need access to those opportunities. Challenges of getting access to some of those international opportunities, international funding, and all that. And then again, on the issue of expertise, manufacturing efficiencies and all that. So these are few of the challenges that personally I've encountered while accessing international funds, continental funds, and also young entrepreneurs do this. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I'll leave it at that too.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shimela, and thanks for your commitment. I know where you are, the network is challenging, but thanks very much for pulling through. So we've got 5 minutes left now before we have to bring this to an end. And I'm going to come back to Kate. You've been quiet for a while now. And you wrote this report that we've been talking about. In your opinion, just removing yourself from being the author, of the report, to just being one of us today on the panel and, interacting with this information today, what do you think are the, key steps that need to be taken to move things forward?
So for me, I think we need to link the agendas of green technology and youth opportunity, whether it's as an employee or an entrepreneur, to structural transformation on the continent. So in other words, to thinking about how we upgrade, how we transform economies, and how African firms can benefit from green technology uptake around the world. We know there's lots of investment. Critically, there will be increasing amounts of investment, increasing interest. We're seeing it amplified fast already because of the climate crisis and biodiversity and pollution. We cannot allow Africa to be left out. We must support the firms that exist and the entrepreneurs that are up and coming to participate. And essentially, they must be able to participate in what's happening in Africa, first and foremost. So I think there are areas where better integration between, for example, the multilateral funds, their implementing partners, and existing capabilities. We must look for those opportunities that exist now to build firms' inputs into these programs. I appreciate not everything can be manufactured locally, and in some areas we have deeper capabilities than others, and in certain countries, etc. Okay, so it's not something we should just say ideologically around local procurement. I think it has to be quite practical. But we certainly do have capabilities on the continent, and I would like to see firms on the continent benefiting more from the opportunities that do exist with existing funding. So for me, that's a critical area, and I don't know if there needs to be some mapping of at a practical level, the kinds of inputs to firm capabilities, including youth entrepreneurs, but also existing firms, perhaps that are more well established, that I see as a particular immediate opportunity. There are many, but that for me is really important. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Kate. Adeni, in 1 minute, can you just give us a snapshot in 1 minute of what you think those key next steps should be?
Thanks, Tafata. So I think in terms of I think I'd already mentioned 2 examples of next steps, but just to maybe I'll use this opportunity to summarize what I've gotten from this, and something that we at the bank, or the multilaterals, or just the general ecosystem needs to put in mind when developing and implementing these programs. I think, as Chimela said, to support enterprises, will identify the needs of those enterprises and support them, where they need it. A lot of programs, provide very impactful support to these green enterprises, but then there are a lot of green enterprises that are left out due to certain requirements or barriers, and we need to find ways of supporting them. A second, I think, is a point from Tafadza about the awareness raising of this support. How many people know about the support that a lot of organizations on the continent are providing. So that's something that we need to amp up in terms of our communications and awareness raising, not just working through our regular channels, but then also making sure that we can cover people who are not covered through our regular channels in terms of raising awareness for the support that we're offering. I take Shema's point on access to finance. That's our day-to-day job. It's very difficult as someone who used to be an entrepreneur as well, I understand the challenge that is access to finance, and we're working on many initiatives. But going back to Kate's point, we need to make sure all of these initiatives speak to each other. And then finally, the point I haven't touched on at all during this call was Kate's point about mapping inputs or entry points to not just stating what the entry points or inputs or technologies needed are per country or per region, but then also mapping it to the capacity gaps as well. I don't think I've seen anything that does that. So I think that would also be an important way to direct development funds and donor funds to sort of, that would be a useful tool to direct. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adeniyi, for those useful insights. And lastly, Chimela, quick snapshot in 1 minute of what you think the key steps should be.
Okay, so for me, like I mentioned initially, I love the fact that there is an act of empowerment, and there is a focus on youth employment, youth entrepreneurship in the report, and then going forward, particularly on youth entrepreneurship, just like what Adeniyi mentioned, there should be a lot of support provided for these young persons, because if one young person is able to create a clean tech startup, for instance, that particular startup or company has the capacity that to employ up to 10, 15. So imagine we have hundreds of young Africans who are running this clean tech startups and all that. They're not just promoting entrepreneurship in the continent, they're also promoting, employment and all of that. And, as a way of, moving forward, I would, suggest that we should provide a lot of support to the young person, in terms of financial support, the bank as super, heading. I would also provide support for, mentorship and guidance. There should be a framework that provides all of the support to these young persons, provide especially on education, training, and I said their skills, especially like I mentioned initially, there wouldn't be a just transition to energy, there wouldn't be a promotion on green technology when these young persons do not even understand what green technology is all about. From our experience, like I mentioned initially, deploying to rural communities. We go to a lot of rural communities and they don't even understand what green technology is about. So there are young persons in these communities. They've never seen a solar panel. They don't know what it stands for. So I think a lot should be done, in terms of sensitization, training, capacity building, on these areas of green technology, and then of course providing support for those, give them access to financing, give them access to mentorship support, give them access to incubators and accelerator programs, of course, lots of other support, legal for their business. I didn't initially mention the aspect of the business. I think we as we've also faced some issues. I think when it comes to funding from investors of VCs, there are lots that goes to corporate governance, legacies and all that. So I think providing support in.
Chimela, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, thanks. I have to step in. We risk going over time now, but thank you very much for those final remarks and comments. I'll hand over now back to Apri to wrap up. But before I hand over, I want to thank our key speaker, Kate, for putting together a very informative presentation. For those of us who've read the report, your presentation really captured the key points from the report that needed to be shared. So thank you very much for that presentation. And then to our three panelists, Adeni, Kate again, and Chimela, thank you very much for the very, insightful and incisive comments and inputs that you gave. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, but I think it also raises something to APRI that I would want to challenge them on, that there needs to be follow-up conversation on this. I think there are some key areas that we need to really unbundle and follow up on and have more targeted conversation to unpack those issues that have come out from today. And thank you again to APRI for your leadership, as well as MasterCard for the support in funding this work. It's very important work, very timely work, very strategic work for the African continent, very crucial to the youth on our continent. It resonates with a lot of messages coming out of national governments. And I think this is work that we really need to take forward and ensure that there's an uptake at national level in terms of mainstreaming it into policies at the national level. So I'll hand over to you and thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making time to join us this afternoon. And we hope you enjoyed attending the event as much as we enjoyed hosting it. Tafa has said most of the things that I had planned to say, so I'm not going to repeat it. But I think the biggest takeaway is that green technology is indeed a lever for sustainable development. But for this to happen, it has to be done right. And the speakers have already acknowledged that policies and programs do exist, but there has to be more focus, there has to be more research, and there has to be more evidence generated. And on this call, I want to announce that the conversations are not ending with this event. The next phase of the project are taking these conversations into 3 African countries, where we'll be diving deep into the issues that have been unbundled here today. The report is now on our website for you to download and read. We'll be keen to hear your feedback. Share it with your network, share it with your policymakers, and let us know where we can improve upon the work that we are doing. And also keep an eye on our website for the next publications and events on this thematic area. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.